Nobody thinks it's heavy. That is the first thing you need to understand about the uniform. You walk past Horse Guards parade on a Tuesday morning, phone already raised, and you see the plume first, that sweep of white horsehair rising from the helmet like something from a painting, and your brain files it instantly. Decorative, ceremonial, probably hollow, probably plastic, probably the same category as the foam swords they sell in the gift shop 2 streets over. You are wrong, and the degree to which you are wrong is the entire point of this story. The full mounted ceremonial kit worn by a trooper of the household cavalry, the helmet, the cuirass, the tall boots, the sword, the saddlery, the horse's own ceremonial dress, weighs more than 30 pounds. Some configurations push it past 35. This is not the weight of a costume. This is the weight of a decision someone made centuries ago and has never revoked. A decision that says, you will carry this. You will carry it in silence. You will carry it in summer, when the steel traps heat like a furnace door, and in winter, when the chin chain against your jaw feels like touching a frozen railing with wet hands. You will carry it for hours at a time, on the back of a horse that has been trained for years to ignore everything the city throws at it. Buses, tourists, sirens, pigeons, camera flashes, and the particular chaos of a school group discovering that the horse is real. You will carry it, and you will not move, and the tourists will photograph you, and most of them will assume the hard part is not moving. The hard part is not moving. The hard part is the weight. Start with the plume, because the plume is where the misunderstanding begins. The white horsehair plume that rises from the helmet of a household cavalry trooper is not an ornament someone added to make the uniform look grander. It has a name. It is called the plume, formally, though within different regiments it carries specific designations depending on color and placement, and it has a function that predates the British Empire by centuries. On a battlefield where smoke, dust, and chaos reduced visibility to almost nothing, the plume served as an identification marker. A commander needed to see where his cavalry was. The plume made the helmet visible above the heads of infantry, above the smoke line, above the confusion. The color told you which regiment. The height told you approximately where the officer was. It was, in the most literal sense, a targeting and coordination system worn on the human head. It also served a secondary function that military historians discuss with a kind of clinical admiration: psychological impact. A line of cavalry with tall white plumes moving at speed toward an infantry position did something to the human brain that no tactical manual has ever fully captured. It was not just the horses. It was the plumes. Something about the movement of them, the way they caught wind and light simultaneously, registered in the watching soldier's nervous system as something older than reason. Something that said, these are not men who are afraid. The plume survived every uniform revision, every modernization debate, every generation that looked at it and asked whether it was still necessary. It survived because the people making those decisions understood something the tourists photographing it do not. The plume is not decorative because it was never only decorative. It was always doing 2 jobs at once. It is still doing both of them. The second job is quieter now. No battlefield to cross, no infantry to unsettle, but it still registers in the brain of every person who looks up at it from a pavement in central London and feels, without being able to say exactly why, that the person wearing it is not someone to be casually approached. You feel that. You have probably felt it and not known what to call it. Now you know. The breastplate is called a cuirass, and it is the piece that will recalibrate everything you thought you understood about what these men and women are doing. The cuirass worn by the household cavalry is not a replica. This is the fact that stops people mid-sentence when they first encounter it. It is not a lightweight alloy copy made to look like the original. It is steel. It is formed in the same general manner as its battlefield predecessor, constructed to cover the torso from collarbone to hip. And it is heavy in the way that only steel is heavy, not the distributed heaviness of a loaded backpack, where the weight spreads and your body finds a way to negotiate with it, but the concentrated, unmoving heaviness of a thing that does not care about your comfort, because it was not designed with your comfort in mind. It was designed to stop a sword. It was designed to turn a pistol ball at distance. It was designed by people who understood that the man wearing it would rather be uncomfortable and alive than comfortable and dead. The trooper wearing it today is not going to face a sword or a pistol ball, but the trooper is wearing the same steel regardless because the decision was made and has been continuously remade year after year by every authority responsible for these uniforms, that the weight is part of what the uniform means. Remove the weight and you have a costume. Keep the weight and you have something else. You have a statement. What the steel does to the body across a full ceremonial duty period is something the guards themselves rarely describe in detail, partly from discipline and partly because the description sounds like complaint, and complaint is not in the vocabulary of this particular role. But the physics of it are not a secret. Steel conducts heat. In summer, the cuirass absorbs the sun and holds it, and the temperature inside the breastplate rises well above the ambient air temperature. The body responds the way bodies always respond to heat, it sweats. But the steel does not breathe. The sweat has nowhere to go. The trooper, motionless on horseback, is managing this silently, without moving, without any external sign of distress, because the uniform demands stillness and the body is obligated to comply. In winter, the process reverses. The steel becomes a cold sink, drawing warmth away from the torso with the same indifference it applied to trapping it in summer. The uniform does not have a setting for comfortable. It has a setting for correct, and correct has looked exactly the same for over 200 years. Pressure points accumulate across a long duty period in ways that are specific to the cuirass's construction. The weight does not distribute evenly. It rests on the shoulders via the straps, bears down on the collar structure, and creates a particular kind of fatigue in the muscles of the upper back and neck that is distinct from exercise fatigue. It is the fatigue of holding something still, which is physiologically more demanding than moving under load. Because movement allows muscles to cycle through contraction and release, while stillness requires sustained contraction with no relief interval. The trooper on duty is not resting. The trooper on duty is working continuously, invisibly, in a way that the stillness perfectly conceals. This is not an accident. The stillness is the skill. The concealment of effort is the entire craft. Then there is the helmet. The household cavalry helmet, the dragoon guard's pattern, the steel skull with its brass fittings and its rear peak and its chin chain, is a piece of equipment with almost no concession to the head it sits on. Modern military helmets are engineered around the skull. They have suspension systems, foam liners, adjustment mechanisms, ventilation channels. They are designed by people who understand that a soldier wearing uncomfortable headgear is a soldier whose attention is partially on their headgear. And attention is the one resource in combat that cannot be divided. The ceremonial helmet operates on a different philosophy entirely. It sits on the skull. It is secured by a chin chain, a real chain linked metal, which rests against the jaw and chin with a weight and rigidity that a modern equipment designer would look at and gently set aside. The chain cannot be loosened on duty. This is not a rule that exists because someone wanted to be cruel. It exists because the chin chain, like everything else on the uniform, has an origin in function. It kept the helmet on the head during mounted combat, when a sword blow or a collision could send a loosely secured helmet into the dirt, and the function has been preserved even as the context for that function has been removed. What the chain does to the jaw and neck across a long parade is something you can observe, if you know what to look for, in photographs taken immediately after a ceremonial duty period. The indentation, the slight marking, the evidence of the chain's presence. The guards do not point this out. They do not mention it in the way that a person wearing painful shoes does not stop to show you their feet. It is simply part of the role, filed under the same category as the heat inside the breastplate and the pressure across the shoulders, something that is managed, not discussed. The helmet itself, set on a table, has a solidity that surprises people who pick it up expecting pageantry. It is not the weight of a theatrical prop. It sits in the hand the way a piece of real equipment sits, with the density of something that was made to do a job in an era when jobs of this kind required materials that did not apologize for themselves. It goes on the head. It is not adjusted for comfort. The duty begins. Nobody talks about the horse. This is the second great miscalculation people make at Horse Guards Parade. They look at the mounted trooper and they think, the guard is the impressive part. The horse is furniture. Beautiful furniture, certainly. Photogenic furniture, but furniture. The horse is not furniture. The horse selected for mounted ceremonial duty in the household cavalry has been through a process that most performance athletes would recognize as preparation for elite competition. The selection itself begins with temperament, not training temperament, because the kind of steadiness required cannot be installed in an animal that does not carry the seed of it already. From there, the training is years long, not months, years. The horse must learn to stand absolutely motionless in environments that every evolutionary instinct it possesses identifies as threatening. Crowds, sudden noise, movement at the periphery, camera flashes, the particular combination of smells that a large gathering of excited human beings produces. Children, the specific unpredictability of a tourist who has just realized that the horse is real and has decided to approach it to verify this finding at close range. The horse learns to process all of this and arrive at stillness. It does this while wearing its own ceremonial kit, the bridle, the breastplate, the saddle furniture, the carefully maintained tack that is subject to the same standard of turnout as the trooper's uniform. The horse is also in uniform. This fact, when it fully registers with people, produces a particular kind of delighted disbelief. Of course, the horse is in uniform. The horse is part of the regiment. The horse has been doing this longer than most of the troopers. Some of these animals have more ceremonial hours logged than the humans sitting on their backs. What the horse carries, beyond the 30+ pounds of the trooper's kit and the weight of the trooper themselves, is the harder thing to quantify. It carries the responsibility of stillness in a city that does not stop. London moves constantly around Horse Guards Parade. The traffic does not pause. The tourists do not quiet. The world does not adjust its volume to accommodate the horse's need for calm. The horse adjusts. The horse has been taught to adjust, and it adjusts, and it stands, and it waits, and it carries everything placed on it without complaint and without apparent effort. The apparent effortlessness is the training. The training was years. The years are invisible in the stillness. You are photographing the stillness. You are not seeing the years. Inside the helmet, inside the cuirass, inside the boots that rise to the knee and allow for almost no ankle movement, there is a person. This seems obvious stated plainly, but it is surprisingly easy to forget. The uniform is so complete, so total in its coverage and its visual impact, that the human being wearing it becomes secondary to the spectacle of the thing. The plume catches the eye. The brass catches the light. The horse fills the frame. The person inside the steel becomes, visually, almost an afterthought, a necessary component of the display, certainly, but not quite the point of it. The person is entirely the point of it. Selection for household cavalry mounted duty is not a process that accepts everyone who volunteers. The physical requirements are specific and demanding in ways that go beyond standard military fitness. Height requirements exist because the visual geometry of the mounted trooper, the proportional relationship between the rider and the horse, the way the uniform reads from a distance, is part of the specification. The riding ability required is not the riding ability of someone who has been on a horse before. It is the riding ability of someone who can manage a trained but genuinely powerful animal in a public environment without any visible management. The appearance must be effortless. The reality is controlled contact, sustained attention, and the constant micro-adjustments that keeping a large animal calm in a crowded environment actually requires. The duty periods are long. The preparation before them is longer. The turnout standard for the uniform, the polish of the breastplate, the condition of the leather, the precise presentation of every element is maintained by the trooper. This is not handled by a support team who appears before the duty begins and disappears when it ends. The trooper is responsible for their own kit. The hours spent preparing the cuirass to the standard required for public duty are hours that do not appear in the final image. They exist in the preparation room, in the particular smell of metal polish and leather conditioner, in the careful attention to a surface that will be examined by every passing tourist and found acceptable or not based on standards that do not compromise. A full duty day preparation, mounted period, return, kit maintenance can run to 8 hours or beyond. The mounted portion, the visible portion, the portion that gets photographed, is a fraction of that. The fraction that does not get photographed is where most of the labor lives. The guards do not discuss this in the way that people performing difficult jobs sometimes discuss them, not for the validation of the discussion, not to ensure that the difficulty is acknowledged. They do the preparation, they do the duty, they return the kit to its standard, they do it again. The continuity of this across decades, across generations of troopers who did the same preparation in the same way for the same reasons, is itself a kind of statement, not a spoken one. The household cavalry is not an institution that makes spoken statements about its own effort. The statement is the turnout. The statement is the silence on horseback in the middle of a city that never stops moving. The statement is the chain against the jaw and the heat inside the steel and the stillness that conceals both. Every other major military in the world with a ceremonial mounted tradition has, at some point in the last century, made significant adjustments to its dress uniform. Materials have been updated, weights have been reduced, comfort has been introduced as a design consideration. The logic is straightforward. The function the original uniform served no longer exists. Cavalry charges are not happening. The battlefield identification system embedded in the plume is not being used. The cuirass is not stopping any swords. Why carry the weight of a world that no longer requires it? Britain looked at this logic and arrived at a different answer. The answer is not stubbornness, though it looks like stubbornness from the outside. The answer is not tradition for its own sake, though tradition is certainly part of the conversation. The answer, when you trace it carefully through the decisions that have been made and remade about this uniform across 2 centuries, is something more considered than either of those explanations. The weight is the memory. A lightweight replica of the cuirass would look identical in a photograph. From 20 feet away on a gray London morning, no tourist would know the difference. The plume would still catch the wind. The brass would still catch the light. The horse would still be enormous and motionless and beautiful. The image would be the same. But the person inside the replica would be carrying something different. They would be carrying the shape of the history without its actual weight. And the decision, renewed continuously, never formally rescinded, has been that the shape without the weight is not the same thing. That there is something transferred in the carrying of actual steel, actual weight, across actual hours, that does not transfer in the carrying of a reproduction. That the trooper who has stood for 4 hours in a steel shell in July heat has a relationship to the history of that uniform, that a trooper in a comfortable approximation of it does not and cannot have. This is not a comfortable philosophy. It is not supposed to be. Comfort was never the point. The point was that some things cost something, and the cost should not be quietly removed just because the original reason for paying it no longer applies. The reason the cost was paid in the first place was real. The people who paid it were real. The weight of the steel is the acknowledgement that they were real, and that what they did mattered, and that we have not decided it matters less just because it is inconvenient to carry. The uniform carries the weight so that the institution does not forget what the weight once meant. So here is what you are actually looking at. The next time you raise your phone at Horse Guards Parade, you are looking at a person who was up before you, who spent time this morning on their knees with a cloth and a tin of metal polish, working a surface to a standard you will assess and move on from in 3 seconds, who climbed onto a horse that has been trained for years to carry this specific combination of weight and stillness in this specific environment, who settled the helmet onto their skull and adjusted nothing because nothing is adjusted, who is now managing the heat inside the steel, the chain against the jaw, the pressure across the shoulders, the weight of more than 30 pounds distributed across a body that is also managing the balance and contact required to sit correctly on a moving animal that has been asked to be motionless, who is doing all of this while you decide whether to use portrait mode. The plume catches the wind. It does what it has always done. It identifies the position. It signals something to the observing brain that the brain cannot quite name. It moves in a way that makes you feel, somewhere below the level of conscious thought, that this is not a person to be casually approached. The steel catches the light the way steel does, not the warm glow of gold, not the soft finish of paint, but the hard, flat brightness of a material that was chosen because it was honest about what it was. The horse does not move. The guard does not move. London moves around them with complete indifference, which is maybe the most London thing about the whole arrangement. And most people walk past, or they stop for 30 seconds, take the photograph and walk on, which is fine. This is not a criticism of the walking past. The guards are not there to be appreciated in any particular depth. They are there to be present. Continuity is the service they provide. The fact that very few of the people who photograph them understand what they are looking at does not change what they are looking at. But if you actually stop and look, and let the reality of what you're seeing settle past the first impression of costume and ceremony and tourism brochure pageantry, something shifts. You start to see the weight, not literally. You cannot see 30 pounds, but you start to understand that it's there, that the stillness you are interpreting as passivity is actually an ongoing act of extraordinary discipline, that the uniform you filed under decorative is carrying a conversation with several centuries of history and refusing to simplify it for your convenience, that the person inside the steel is not performing effortlessness. They are performing presence, fully, continuously, at a cost that does not show. There is a word for that. Several words, actually, depending on which tradition you're drawing from. But the simplest one is commitment, the kind that does not require an audience to sustain itself, the kind that would look exactly the same if nobody came to photograph it at all. Will you see it differently now? Will the next person who stops at Horse Guards Parade understand what they're looking at before the phone comes up, before the image is taken and filed and scrolled past? We genuinely like to know. Leave your thoughts below. Have you ever stood in front of a mounted guard and felt that shift, that moment where the costume becomes something heavier? Or is this the first time the weight of it has landed for you? Either way, you know now. And knowing changes the photograph. It changes what you're recording when you press the button. You're not capturing a costume anymore. You're capturing a person carrying history in steel, in silence, on horseback, in the middle of a city that stopped needing them to do it centuries ago. They do it anyway. That's the whole story.